The moment I opened his bedroom door and saw him clutching that camera, staring at the photos of me dressed in satin bathed in red light, I knew something between us had shifted forever. I'm Seraphine, 42 years old, a mother who thought she understood the limits until that night shattered them. Tell me honestly, have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of a boundary you thought was unbreakable and realized you'd already crossed it? Leave your thoughts below. This story isn't just about me. It's about how easily life can slip beyond the lines we once swore we'd never cross. That morning, the small town of Elderglow was draped in a pristine white blanket after a snowstorm that lasted all night. Through the frost-covered window, I stood silently, holding my cup of hot tea tightly, quietly watching the pale light of January drift along the empty streets. Outside, the world seemed to be holding its breath, so quiet that it felt like every sound melted into the snow. But inside me, there was a simmering chaos. Days like this always made me think of Thane, the man who once promised to hold my hand for life but ultimately left, leaving me and Lior to rebuild everything from the wreckage. When Thane left, Lior was only 4 years old. A child who didn't yet fully understand the concept of loss was forced to grow up with the gaps in his heart. I was the same. The years of raising a child on my own weren't easy, but somehow we made it through together. All right, He's will lead me into the unforgettable favor of my darkest, loneliest corners of my soul still hold a flicker of warm light. Tighten my grip around the teacup, as if trying to hold on to that fragile warmth for just a little longer. The dreams I once had to leave this town and paint a brighter life now lay like the snow outside, covering everything, burying it silent. The sound of determined footsteps on the stairs pulled me back to the present. I turned my head and saw Lior standing in the kitchen doorway, a thick sweater hugging his tall, lean frame, his familiar camera hanging over his shoulder, and the warm smile that never changed. "Good morning, Mom," Lior said, bending down to place a light kiss on my cheek. The warmth from that touch calmed my heart. I smiled and asked softly, "Were you off to so early?" Lior shrugged, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I'm going to the lake. The snow looks beautiful this morning. The light will be perfect today." A swell of pride rose in my chest. This boy, even when he was little, had the ability to see beauty in the small things that others overlooked. Lior's photos didn't just capture moments. They seemed to tell entire stories. A thought flickered in my mind, one that even surprised me. "Do you need me to come with you?" I asked, trying to hide the excitement in my voice. Lior's eyes lit up like a child receiving an unexpected gift. "Really, you'll come with me?" I smiled and tilted my head slightly. "Of course. It's been a long time since I've been to the lake in winter." We both put on thick coats, wrapped scarves around our necks, and stepped outside. The cold air swept across my face, making me shiver slightly. But looking at Lior's bright smile, I felt my heart warm a little more with each step. On the snow-covered path, we walked side by side, leaving fresh footprints in the soft snow. Our steps in sync, like a quiet, unspoken bond, one that I knew Thane had missed forever. The faint light of winter embraced us, and I suddenly realized perhaps the new chapters of my life didn't need to start from another grand love. All I needed was Lior, and that was enough. The cold wind whistled softly between the bare trees, creating a scene that was peaceful yet sharp. Each breath we exhaled turned into a wisp of white smoke, floating gently before dissipating into the air. The lake appeared before us, partly frozen, covered in a layer of snow as soft as velvet. The bare branches surrounding it seemed to be coated in silver by the frost, sparkling under the weak sunlight of the early morning. Lior quickly found a good spot, preparing his camera, his eyes focused as if devouring the scene before him. I stood beside him, silently observing, not just the landscape but also my son, the quiet companion in my long, lonely life. The image of Lior, carefully adjusting the camera, his gaze full of passion, made my heart stir unexpectedly. For a brief moment, Thane's image flashed in my mind. Not the indifferent Thane of the later years of our marriage, but the young man who once held me by the lake, also on a snow-covered morning like this. Mom, Lior's gentle voice pulled me back to the present. I startled, then smiled to ease the awkwardness. Yes, I was just thinking for a moment. Lior looked at me for a while, his eyes soft yet deep. About Dad? The question, as light as the wind, struck a tender spot in my heart. I slowly nodded. Sometimes I still miss him. Not miss him as he is now, but miss what could have been. A complete family, a different future. Lior fell silent, then suddenly moved closer, wrapping his arms around me. In that cold setting, the hug brought such warmth that I almost cried. Mom, Lior said, his voice deep and firm, if I could choose again, I would still want it to be just the two of us. It was a simple affirmation, but one that carried a weight words could never express. I held him tightly, feeling the once small, now strong and steady body in my arms. The passage of time rushed by, and I realized Lior was no longer the child he once was. He was a man who knew how to love and protect me in his own way. We stood there, motionless, in the space filled with white and dim light. The world seemed to stop, and only the two of us existed. When we let go of each other, Lior softly said, "You've always been my greatest inspiration." I laughed gently, patting his shoulder. "You're just saying that to make me happy, aren't you?" Lior shook his head, his eyes laughing but his voice utterly serious. "No, you're the one who first taught me to see beauty in the simplest things." I fell silent, feeling a deep wave of emotion rise in me. Standing before this young man I had raised, a kind soul, one who knew how to love and feel. The weak light of the winter sun illuminated Lior's face, making every trace of maturity, every glance filled with passion, clearer than ever. Suddenly, Lior raised his camera, aiming it directly at me. "Let me take a picture of you, Mom," he said, grinning mischievously. "You're the best part of today." I was about to refuse, but the way Lior looked at me, so proud, so affectionate, made it impossible to say no. I nodded gently. The click sounded. A small moment, but I knew it would stay with us for a long time, a quiet proof of the eternal love between a mother and her child. We left the lake as the sun climbed higher, its weak rays reflecting off the thin ice like shattered mirrors. On the way back, Lior continuously checked the photos in his camera, occasionally turning to smile at me with eyes sparkling with joy. When we got home, the biting cold outside seemed to melt away in the familiar warmth of the small kitchen. I hung my coat on the rack and removed my gloves, still covered with glistening snowflakes. Lior followed behind, still holding his camera firmly. "Mom, sit down," Lior said, his voice full of secrecy. "I want to show you something." I sat down in the chair, slightly curious. Lior connected the camera to the old laptop on the table, quickly scrolling through the first few landscape photos, the lake, the snow, the ice-covered branches, and then the photo appeared. It was me, against the white snow. The simple beige sweater I wore stood out strangely. My face was flushed from the cold wind, my eyes gazing off into the distance, a slight smile on my lips. In the frame, I was no longer the woman burdened by age and daily worries. I appeared as a woman full of life and warmth. I was silent, staring at the screen. "Do you see it?" Lior spoke, his finger pointing to the photo. "Not just beautiful, you're radiant in a way you've never realized." I swallowed, my throat tightening. "Lior," I spoke, but didn't know what to say next. Lior turned to me, his gaze serious, more serious than I had ever seen before. "You've always thought of yourself as someone who stands in the background, as the foundation for others. But to me, you've always been the center, always the light." I turned away, afraid my son would see the tears that had started to well up in my eyes. But Lior was patient, gentle. "Do you know," Lior continued, his voice almost a whisper, "how many times I've taken pictures of landscapes but always searched for your image in them? The quiet corners, the misty roads, the empty chairs. It's because I miss you in those lonely moments. I could no longer stay silent. I turned back and took his hand. You've grown up, I whispered. You don't have to carry my loneliness anymore. Lior shook his head and gently squeezed my hand. No, Mom, I want you to know you're not alone. I'm here, forever. In the simple kitchen, before the laptop screen glowing with winter photos, Lior and I sat side by side, our hands holding each other. The snow outside might cover the whole world, but in that moment, in this small space, only pure warmth remained. A very strange feeling welled up inside me, like a door long closed had just quietly opened. The way Lior looked at me then, no longer just like before. In his gaze, I saw deep empathy and an intense desire to ease my loneliness. Something I hadn't dared to name. But I knew I could feel it. Something inside my heart had begun to change. That evening, after a simple dinner filled with laughter, I cleared the dishes while Lior disappeared upstairs with his camera in hand. The house once again fell into its usual quiet, only the sound of the wind softly blowing through the window. As I was drying the dishes, I heard footsteps returning. Lior appeared at the stairs, holding a small silver box wrapped in red ribbon. This is for you, Mom, Lior smiled, his eyes shining brightly like a child eagerly waiting. I dried my hands on the towel and walked over. What is this? I asked, suddenly feeling nervous for reasons I couldn't quite explain. It's just a small gift, Lior replied. I've had it ready for a while, but today seemed like the right time. I carefully untied the red ribbon. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small, sparkling stone as the pendant. Simple, yet beautifully captivating. I looked up at my son, my eyes brimming with tears. Lior, you didn't have to. It's not because you need it, Lior interrupted gently. I want you to remember that you are always worthy of love, worthy of being cherished. I tightened my grip around the box, a lump rising in my throat, unable to hold it back. How long had it been since I received a gift that wasn't out of obligation or formality, but simply because I was me? Let me put it on for you, Lior whispered, a soft invitation. I nodded, my heart racing as I turned around. Lior's fingers gently brushed the back of my neck, and my skin tingled with emotion. The necklace felt cold at first, but Lior's warm hands made me forget the chill of winter. Won't you wear it? Lior whispered in my ear. Remember that in my eyes, you're always as beautiful as this. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in like warm water. A strange, unnameable feeling crept into my heart. When I turned back to face Lior, the distance between us was very close. Close enough that I could feel his warm breath against my cheek. Lior's eyes locked onto mine. No longer just the eyes of a boy looking at his mother. There was something deeper, more intimate, more intense. I took a step back instinctively, trying to regain my breath, trying to push away the chaos that had suddenly erupted inside me. Did you know, Mom, that you've just been captured in the best photo of my life? Lior laughed softly, but in his smile, there was something held back, an emotion that couldn't be named. I could only smile gently, hiding the turmoil inside. As long as you're happy with what you're doing, I said quietly, I'll be happy too. Lior nodded. But that gaze, the gaze that wouldn't let go of my heart, lingered for a long time, even after he turned and climbed back upstairs to his own world. I stood there in the small kitchen, one hand clutching the pendant against my chest, and for the first time in many years, I realized the door had opened inside me, and Lior was the one who had gently pushed it open. That night, the snow fell thickly again. The large, soft snowflakes drifted slowly from the dark sky, silently covering the rooftop, sidewalks, and even the memories I was trying to hide. I sat alone in the living room, the firelight from the fireplace casting a soft orange glow, creating vague shapes on the walls. In my hand was a cup of tea, now cold, but I couldn't bring myself to replace it with a new one. My mind was still lingering on the moment earlier, the cool necklace touching my skin, Lior's gaze, that brief touch that felt accidental but sent my heart into turmoil. A soft knock on the door startled me. I looked up and saw Lior standing there, wearing a thin sweater, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "It's like I thought you might want something warmer," he said, his gaze a mix of bashfulness and tenderness. I smiled softly, touched by my son's thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Lior. I really do need it." He stepped in, handed me 1 cup, then sat down in the armchair across from me. The fire between us cast shimmering light on his face, making Lior look both youthful and strangely different in a way I couldn't define. We sat in silence, sipping the hot cocoa, listening to the sound of snow falling outside the window like a sad yet comforting symphony. "Mom," Lior spoke after a long while, his voice soft like the wind. I looked up and met his gaze, direct, sincere, and full of so much he wanted to say. "Ignore, I probably shouldn't say this," Lior continued, his voice becoming deeper. "But sometimes I wonder, if we weren't mother and son, would everything be different?" My heart tightened. A long moment passed before I could find my voice. "Lior," I whispered, unsure whether to deny it, reassure him, or admit that deep down, I too had once vaguely wondered the same. He placed his cup on the table, stood up, and in just a few short steps, was standing right in front of me. I felt Lior's warm breath, felt the temperature rise in the cold room. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable," Lior whispered, leaning in closer, his eyes sweeping across my face as if trying to memorize every feature. "But I can't pretend anymore." His hand gently found mine, his fingers brushing over the back of my hand. A gesture that was both tender and strong, suffocating in its intensity. I should have pushed Lior away. I should have extinguished the flame that had just ignited in the air. But I just sat there, motionless, drawn into that gaze, one filled with admiration, loneliness, and a feeling too vast to be simply labeled as love. Outside, the snow continued to fall. In the small room, the space between us slowly shrank, like the snowflakes erasing the boundary between the earth and the sky. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as Lior gently leaned in, trying to express emotions he couldn't put into words. A fragile gap, one that could be shattered with a simple movement. "And at that moment, Lior," I whispered softly, with all the fear and the suppressed longing that had built up over time, "Don't." But my hand still held his, and my eyes still looked deep into his, not looking away. The space seemed to freeze after my weak whisper. I had said, "Don't." But my voice, my gaze, my hand still hadn't let go of Lior. He stood there, his breath slightly trembling, his dark brown eyes staring deep into mine, as if probing, seeking certainty, searching for a permission we both knew no one should really give. I slowly pulled my hand away, my fingers still tingling with warmth. "Lior, we shouldn't," I tried to speak calmly, but it sounded more like a self-justification than a prohibition. He didn't respond. Instead, Lior knelt right before me, so close that I could see the tiny reflections of light in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. But that tone carried more than respect. It was filled with a yearning to be understood, to be touched, to be loved as a man longs for affection, not just as my child, but as a mature young man fully aware of our emotional complexity. I closed my eyes for a long moment. I needed to stop this. I had to. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Lior's face right there, so close that any empty word seemed meaningless. One of his cheeks gently pressed into my hand, searching for tenderness, permission, acknowledgement. And then, I heard myself whisper, "Our boy's too weak to refuse." I don't know why I said that. Maybe it was because the loneliness had built up for too long. Maybe because I'd lacked the feeling of being seen, being cherished, for all those years. Or maybe because I also longed to feel alive again, if only for this moment, despite everything. Lior looked up at me, his eyes filled with emotions he could no longer hold back. When his lips gently touched my hand, I trembled. But this time, I didn't pull away. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he leaned forward and kissed my cheek. A soft, light kiss, but it took my breath away. A kiss no longer simply parental affection, but a deeper emotional reliance, one that had approached a difficult emotional boundary that required immediate reflection. I closed my eyes, feeling Lior's hand gently brush my cheek in a supportive gesture. My heart pounded wildly, but my body betrayed all logic. I didn't pull away. And then, when he gently touched my hand, offering comfort and reassurance, soft, shy, but full of the weight of emotions that had been held back for so long, I knew we had entered a complicated emotional space. We couldn't easily step back from that kiss, which should have terrified me, should have made me push Lior away, but instead, I only felt a warmth fill me, a sweet pain so intense that I silently wept inside. Lior quickly pulled away from me, terrified that he had hurt me. "Mom, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." I placed my hand gently on his lips, stopping his apologies. I shook my head, tears glistening under the firelight. "It's not your fault, Lior," I whispered. "We're both lost." We sat there in a heavy silence while the snow continued to fall thickly outside, covering every trace. That silence, so dense it was suffocating, spoke everything, the taboo, the longing, and the despair that, once we crossed the line, we would never be able to return to those pure old days. After that night, everything between Lior and me changed. I need to say it out loud. The change is evident in the eyes, in every small gesture. It had become an intense emotional dependence, complicated and fragile, but a tightly wound emotional bond, rough and fragile, binding two lonely souls together. The next day, I woke up feeling suffocated. The snow outside still covered everything in white, the cold morning light piercing through the window curtains. I curled up in the blanket, wondering how to fix what had happened. The sound of a gentle knock on the door. A familiar knock. I pulled the blanket up to my chest, trying to sound normal. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Lior stepped inside. His hair was tousled from just waking up, and his eyes still held a hint of sadness. He said softly, hesitantly, as if afraid to wake something fragile. I sat up and nodded slightly. "Good morning, Lior." The atmosphere between us was thick. He slowed down, as if gauging my mood. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching for permission or at least a sign that what happened last night was not completely rejected. I opened my mouth to say that everything yesterday was a mistake, that we had to stop. But when Lior's gaze landed on the slightly loose collar of my robe, I fell silent. He took another step, sitting down beside the bed. So close that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, hear the soft, trembling breath. "Mom, last night," he said hesitantly, "I've never seen you like this, Mom. Never seen you beautiful like this." I clutched the edge of the blanket tightly in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lior, we can't." But my weak protest was quickly drowned out when he gently took my hand and raised it to his lips. A light, trembling kiss, but full of determination. "You know," Lior whispered, his eyes pleading, "how lonely I've felt all these years, when seeing you bear the weight of everything, when seeing you silently endure. I just want you to know, Mom, that you are not alone. I want to say that I know, that I feel that love every day, but at the same time, I also know clearly that the feelings we are sharing right now have gone beyond permissible limits." Instead of answering, I just gently squeezed his hand. In that heavy moment of silence, Lior leaned down and gently pressed his forehead against mine. That gesture, so tender, so sincere, made the last fragile wall of defense within me crumble. I gently closed my eyes, letting the emotions take over. A warm hand gently brushed the tangled hair by my temple. Another kiss, gentler than last night, but also more challenging, because we understood how delicate our emotional bond had become. And this time, I responded myself. We didn't rush into each other like in passionate stories. Everything unfolded slowly, hesitantly, trembling, like two lost souls finding each other in the dark. We connected deeply on an emotional level, understanding each other's loneliness, but also with all the loneliness, the desires, and the wounds that had accumulated over the years. When Lior softly said, "Mom, please don't shut me out," I knew I had gone too far to turn back. I didn't push him away. Also, I don't push myself out of that weakness. The winter night outside is still bone-chillingly cold. But in this small room, an emotional tension was building that neither of us knew how to handle. A storm that neither Lior nor I have the strength to withstand anymore. The next morning, I woke up in a half-dream, half-awake state. The pale sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a cold, gray light over the room. Lior still lay beside me, his breath steady. He sat quietly beside me, providing silent support, like an unconscious habit. I gently shifted my position, gazing at the face of the boy I once cradled and guided through the years of hardship. Now, that person is no longer a boy, but a man. And I, with all my weakness, we had reached a point of emotional complexity requiring careful reconsideration. A wave of dizziness surged. I hurriedly got out of bed, threw on a robe, and stood by the window. The snow has stopped falling. The white streaks stretch endlessly out there, pure and cold, in stark contrast to the emotional storm raging inside me. Lior turned over, then sat up, the blanket slipping down to reveal he stood by the window, looking vulnerable and thoughtful. He looked at me with determination to face the emotional turmoil together. "Mom," he called softly. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears that were about to spill. "We have to stop," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What happened last night cannot be repeated." Lior stood up slowly, approached. I felt his presence behind me, his warm breath gently brushing against my neck. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. But this time, I turned around, maintaining my distance. "I understand," Lior said, his voice solemn. "But, Mom, you also know we can't pretend it never happened." I tightened the cloak around myself, trying to create a fragile layer of protection. "We have to," I replied, more firmly than my emotions allowed. "You still have a future ahead of you. You have to move on, Lior. You have to forget what happened last night." Lior looked at me for a long time. In those eyes, I saw everything: love, turmoil, pain. And then he nodded. A brief nod, like a cold knife cutting through everything between us. "Okay," he whispered. "If that's what you want, Mom." A silent heartbeat lingers. I didn't answer. I just turned away, because if I looked for one more second, I wouldn't have the courage to let go. No one said anything more as Lior walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a small, heart-wrenching click. I stood there for a long time, only hearing the cold wind blowing through the window frame outside. This cut will never heal. Because the greatest loss is not losing someone, but losing the very part of your heart that you had once given away, which can never be reclaimed. I know from today onwards, there will only be silence left between Lior and me. A heavy silence, carrying with it all the things left unsaid and emotions that can never be touched again. I sat down by the window, resting my head on my arm, staring out at the gray, misty January sky. From here, I could see the solitary footprints Lior had left in the snow before disappearing into the cold morning. The footprints gradually faded, then vanished at the corner of the street, as if they had never existed. I wondered whether he had looked back at all, whether in that moment of parting, he had felt the same sense of loss I did. Perhaps we would never say it out loud. Some things could only be kept in the heart, like a discreet scar, unseen by others but silently aching over the years. I knew I would go on living. There would still be ordinary days, quiet dinners, silent weekend mornings. But I also knew, from that moment on, the winter inside me would never fully melt again. 'Cause some things, once lost, can never truly return. Some stories don't need to end with words. Sometimes, just a moment, a glance, is enough to change everything. Have you ever experienced a parting you couldn't stop, a feeling so warm yet so painful that you could only keep it to yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps by listening to one another, we might find a little empathy amidst these silent wounds.